Hi, welcome to Astrobabble. I'm Donna from Donna B Astrology.
And I'm Lynda from Scallywag Astrology.
And today we're going to be talking about the solar eclipses.
So a solar eclipse happens, well, a solar eclipse is just a new moon with the node close enough to it to cause an eclipse. If the node is at least 18 degrees and 31 minutes within that sun-moon conjunction, it will be an eclipse of some type. If it's that far out, it will be a partial eclipse. But if it is between 0 degrees and 9 degrees and 55 minutes, it will be a total eclipse.
Right. And they start, I did a really quick drawing, so bear with it. I did a really quick drawing, and when you can see it, they'll start at the bottom or the top, and they'll go around the Earth. These nodes will go around the Earth in a spiral kind of form until it'll start in the top or the bottom and work towards the middle and then go to the bottom. And that takes about 1,300 years, 1,280 years, specifically.
That's right,
give or take maybe 11 more days. Yeah, and they'll move. The nodes actually go in reverse of the planets. Our planets go one way, the nodes will go opposite to that. And it takes, the eclipse season is about 18 months in duration. So when you have it in two signs, it'll be in those two signs for 18 months or real close to that. Sometimes there's only 4 eclipses in a year, and sometimes there can be as many as 6 eclipses in a year. And that's the lunar and the solar together, but that's all the eclipses.
So eclipses come in what we call Saros series or Saros cycles. So many years ago, the Babylonians discovered that eclipses kind of had little families, which we call series or cycles. And every 18 years, an eclipse will happen. If Donna, do you want to hold up that little thing again? Oh, no, the little...
Oh, the little card.
Yeah, this little card is actually kind of indicative of the Saros cycles. It'll start at the North Pole or the South Pole, and it'll start off with a little partial eclipse. And then every 18 years, it will have another eclipse. And, you know, at the beginning and at the very end, there will be partial eclipses. And in about the middle of that 1,280 year cycle, give or take,
right about in here,
they will be total eclipses. But all those eclipses in that Saros cycle are linked together. And that's why every 18 years, there can be kind of like a connection. So if particularly you've got an eclipse happening on an important point in your chart or an important house, so like your 1st, 7th, 10th or 4th, there might be something that happened on that eclipse that links to 18 years ago. So, for example, I have someone I'm involved with, and unfortunately he lives overseas, but we met in '99 online, and, you know, that was fine. We were good friends and all the rest of it. And then in 2015, it became a little bit more serious, you know, it became a lot more serious. Unfortunately, we weren't able to meet until 2017, but what was ironic was that's an 18-year cycle. And what was really funny, I was into astrology and that, but hadn't looked much into eclipses myself, but I planned the trip, and it wasn't the most well planned because, I mean, Mercury was not only retrograde at the time in my 9th house of overseas travel, which any astrologer will say, do not travel during Mercury retrograde, particularly when it's in your 9th house of foreign travel, but it was opposite my natal Mercury as well. So yeah, completely wrong time to travel, but, you know, did I let that stop me? But I went and I had a look and I thought, oh, well, what's happening over there at the time? And I landed in America on the 17th of August, 2017, that big, great eclipse you had. But I didn't arrive where I should be till the 18th, and the eclipse was on the 21st. So not only did we kind of meet like 3 days before that eclipse. I just thought it was really cool, and it made me really super interested in eclipses and how they do link. Yeah, so that's my little story. But you, depending on, like, I don't think that eclipse did anything to my chart. Usually if eclipses are making what we call a hard aspect, like a conjunction, opposition, or squaring the eclipse degree, that's usually when you can have something significant. But even if it's happening in your just in your houses, it will still have an impact. Like Donna said, they're in a house for 18 months. So I might bring up a little chart and show people how those nodes move backwards through the zodiac and how they will highlight different houses. But first off, let's have a look at the hoops you've got there to
try to describe
what the nodes are.
Okay, so here we have the orbit of the sun, and we have the Earth right here in the center of it. This one will be the orbit of the moon. Where they intersect is where the nodes are. So you can see that you're going to have one on one side and one on the other. And these actually will probably in demonstration would move around. So they'll end up in different signs. And as it goes backwards, it'll go into the different signs, as Lynda was saying earlier. Like this one right now is in Taurus, Scorpio. So then you'd have, you'd have Gemini, Sagittarius, or Cancer, Capricorn, and those kinds of things. They move together in unison. So the opposite sign is where they'll go. So it'll actually, so if right now is Taurus, Scorpio, the next ones will be Aries and Libra, and the next one will be Pisces and Scorpio and Virgo. So that's how they move in reverse together.
Yeah. So here we have a chart with the north node at 22 degrees of Taurus and the south node at 22 degrees of Scorpio. And I'm just going to move them every year so that this base chart doesn't move too much. But you can see that they go backwards. Taurus here, and then Aries, which is before Taurus, and Pisces. So if you watch, it goes through. And it's
so you can watch the year. Yeah.
Yeah. So 2030, 2031. So yeah, so it will be 2031 before, or 2030 before these planets are here again. But they'll be opposite because the south node will be in Taurus then, and then the north node will be in Scorpio. 2040, they'll be just coming to the end of the Sagittarius Gemini. Yeah. And then the following year they'll be in there.
So they move kind of slow, and you can definitely see them coming on. They take there's about 70 to 72, 73 cycles or eclipses that will go up through
in a total Saros cycle. Yeah.
For that series. Yeah. Rahu is named the north one, and Ketu is the south one. And they're reflective of the north one is reflective of what Saturn does, and it said that the south one is reflective of what Mars does. So it has the energy of more Mars.
I found a really interesting article, and I'm going to link to it in the description, which just talks about different cultures through the centuries and how they've regarded these eclipses, which are, of course, linked to the nodes, because if the nodes aren't near that new moon or full moon, there's no eclipse. But yeah, it's quite interesting. So I will link to that. At any given time, there's 42 Saros cycles happening, which is rather interesting. But I mean, because each Saros cycle, it's only every 18 years that there's an eclipse happening, we have different Saros cycles or Saros families happening every year. Like this year it might be 1 north, and next year it might be 2 north or 5 north, or some other Saros cycle. So yeah.
Yep. And throughout history, we've been looking at eclipses, specifically with in regard to they plan earthquakes, they plan how the leader of the country, could be. So they signify very, very important events, no matter what kind of chart you're looking for. So if you're looking at your natal chart, wherever those eclipses fall is going to be very more significant than any other normal time. And then it is as well that for the eclipses and for the Aries Ingress charts, as we have looked at before. So
yeah. We had a look at some presidents that were assassinated and the eclipses that happened just before that, and it was quite eye-opening, wasn't it, Donna?
It definitely was. It definitely was. The one president that worked with an astrologer managed to escape the assassination, but that chart looked pretty dangerous.
Yeah. Eclipses, for they bring in quite shocking sudden events. Because it is shocking, and many years ago, an eclipse of the sun could often mean the death of a king, or that is what was feared. And so it's rather interesting. The solar eclipse is a new moon, which is a time when we usually sow seeds. We're starting new beginnings and that. So I've heard it said that eclipses can bring new information to light, or be kind of external events happening, whereas your full moon, which is a lunar eclipse, can be about endings or eclipse someone or something out of your life. Full moons being to do with endings, and a lunar eclipse being a full moon when that node is close enough. I know that the node has to be closer for the lunar eclipse to occur. It's not quite 18 degrees, it's a lot closer. But we'll probably do an episode on the lunar eclipse, because it was just so much. We were discussing it earlier, and it's just like, wow, there's just so much here to get into.
There is a bit. Did you want to go and start on the charts we were looking at for how they...
Yeah, I thought what we might do first is just run through, just so for people, like, we have eclipses coming up all the time.
Good idea. So if this is happening in your first house, if the eclipse is going to happen in your first house, this is going to happen. A lot could change with your vitality, your personal appearance, or anything you wanted to do specifically for yourself. And it would also impact the house of the other. So things could change there as well.
With your closest one-on-one relationships. Yeah.
And
if these eclipses are happening over your 2nd and 8th house, that means kind of sudden changes or unexpected events cropping up to do with your personal finances, or your resources, your income, or shared finances and resources, which can include things like inheritances, loans, taxation, and money that you share with others.
Right. And if this happens in your 3rd house, it'll have to do with your community that's close with you, or higher education as well could be affected. Philosophy.
Mm-hmm. And if this is happening over your 4th and 10th house axis, this could be things like sudden changes, unexpected events happening to do with home and or career. Because with the solar eclipse, there's always a lunar eclipse with it, 2 weeks later or 2 weeks prior. So when one house is getting hit, the house that is opposite is also getting hit. That's 4th house, home and career, or home and public reputation.
Yeah. The next house that could together be impacted will be the 5th and the 11th house. And that could be, I like what you said earlier about it's going to be a sudden change. Eclipses tend to bring on something that is suddenly illuminated. So that would be hitting your 5th and your 11th house of either your children or your arts and where you express your creativity. And then again, in the other house would be, your groups and friends, and that kind of thing could change suddenly.
Yeah, sometimes unexpected things come to light. And if this is happening over your 6th, 12th axis, this is the house of your ill health and service to others, or the house of confinement, which could include things like prisons or hospitals. It's also our undoing. It's our self-defeating habits. It's escapism. So those things, matters to do with those things might come to light at that time. Sometimes you'll have an eclipse, it won't make any real impact. Just because it's happening across your 2nd and 8th house doesn't mean that, suddenly money matters are going to be horrific or anything, or sudden things come out. But, particularly if you have a planet or a chart point like your ascendant or your MC, or even the nodes itself, the nodes where they were at the time of your birth, if that happens, then yes, quite possibly. But for some people, some eclipses, it just doesn't kind of matter that much, or doesn't seem to have much effect, whereas others, it's just like, completely wiped out.
Yes. Yeah. It's it could either happen on those houses, or it could happen square to those houses, which would be 1, 2, 3, 4 houses away. So it would, whatever, like if you have like Scorpio, if it's happening there, then in Aquarius and Leo could, if you have planets there at that exact degree, and it doesn't have to be exact. It doesn't have to be like, the eclipse doesn't have to be right on it to occur there. If they are by degree aspecting the eclipse, it probably will affect you in a more critical way. In other words, it's not going to be a slow, long process. It's going to be quick. That would happen. It might take 18 months to recover from it, or 18 years. But
yeah.
Yeah,
that's an interesting idea too. I've read that sometimes it takes until Mars or Saturn comes along and triggers that degree by conjunction or square. It can trigger something then. I've also heard that up to a month before an eclipse can also kind of be included in that. And we were looking at one of the charts, I forget which one it was, but I know one of the presidents was assassinated between eclipses. And as Donna said at the time, it's just a chaotic time in between eclipses. So, yeah.
Yeah, do we want to show them how they work?
Yes.
Let's see. Well, while you're doing that, I used to be a Girl Scout leader, and that is always, I was in charge of safety. So I'll tell you, don't be looking at the sun when these eclipses happen.
Yeah.
They will hurt your eyes. The intense light will burn the back of your retinas or whatever. So just to make sure you have the proper gear. So if you're listening to this in advance, you'll be able to acquire that, something to look at. To be able to,
I believe
there are safe ways to look at an eclipse.
Yeah, I think the next big solar eclipse, total solar eclipse for the US is, I think, about the 8th of April, 2024. So that'll be interesting.
Yes, it will be.
Well, this is Abraham Lincoln's chart. His chart is on the inside.
That's his natal chart, right?
That's his natal chart. So these are where the planets were when he was born, which was the 12th of February, 1809. And he was shot, I believe, on the 14th of April, 1865. And we learnt earlier that I believe the Civil War actually finished on the 9th of April, 1865. There was a total lunar eclipse on the 10th of April, the day after, at 21 degrees of Libra. So that's interesting. But anyway, this is Lincoln's chart in the middle. And on the outside, we have the eclipse of the 25th of April, which was, when was he shot? I can't remember.
The 14th, April 14th.
This was, yeah,
Yeah.
he was the president we were talking about who was shot in between eclipses. So you can see here the eclipse degree, 5 degrees of Taurus, is right on his south node, which south node is often considered malefic or not good. Doesn't bring good things. It's in his 4th house of home and family, but it's also the grave. It's endings as well. So it's rather interesting that this eclipse happened on his south node. We also have Saturn, the greater malefic, on his natal Mars. So this is really hard. We've got the eclipse degree in an angular house.
They're definitely telling.
Yeah.
Yeah, the natal, the inner house is the inner circle. There is the what we call the natal promise. So you will see a lot of things, a lot of signatures in the natal house that get played out throughout the years. So this did not happen when he was 2 years old. So these planets are all lining up this specific way for his assassination. I just want to say you can't get married, be a president, die, and learn how to walk and graduate kindergarten all in, one time. So you have to break that up. And so that's how this is showing with this eclipse. That was just after, because the eclipses can affect change either before or within 2 months, either before or after, or sometimes even a year. So this is the eclipse after his assassination.
Yeah, what I thought was really interesting too was I set the eclipse charts for all the presidents for where they were born. They probably weren't living there at the time. They were probably in Washington or wherever when the eclipse happened. But when we look at solar returns, when you're doing, well, I do, and I know Donna does, and a lot of Hellenistic astrologers set it for the birthplace. So I set these for the birthplace, and doing that, the MC for the time of this eclipse fell on his natal Mercury, which amongst other things rules his 8th house of death. So I thought that was interesting too. Also the 5th house, which we were talking about, he was in a theatre at the time, which is very 5th house, so that fit as well. And then you've got that Uranus, transiting Uranus would have been in that at the time of the eclipse, was in his 5th house, opposed by Jupiter in the 11th.
A retrograde Jupiter.
Yes, very interesting. Be interesting to know how far away that was. See. That would have been very close to have just happened, I imagine.
Mm-hmm.
And then if we look at the Aries Ingress for that year, and the Aries Ingress, we did a podcast on Aries Ingress and how you could tell what was ahead for the nation by looking at what happened when Aries entered 0 degrees of that year and set for the nation's capital. This is for Washington, D.C. In 20th of March, 1865. We've got the moon in the 8th, and the moon represents the people. So I don't know whether there was a lot of national mourning at the time or not, but I imagine it was. I mean,
it was right after the Civil War. I suspect half the country was in mourning.
Yeah. I mean, it's really interesting. You've got Mars and Uranus in the 1st house, which represents the country in general, with Mars being violence and Uranus being unexpected and upheaval, and yeah.
And Mercury is under the beams, the ascendant ruler of that Aries Ingress chart. So,
yeah.
And if Virgo is in the 4th house. So those are all telling signs of probably not a really good year.
Yeah. The sun can represent the ruler, but we can also look at the 10th house and see what the ruler of the 10th house is, which is Jupiter. So Jupiter was opposite that Sun Uranus conjunction at the time. So yeah, not good for the ruler of the country at that time. And as it turned out, that was very right.
Yeah. So we have Garfield is the next president that we'll be looking at. He passed away in 1881. He was shot 9/14 of 81. What are we looking at? Is this the eclipse chart?
This is the prior eclipse, 27th of May. So it was at 6 degrees of Gemini up in the 10th house. I've set it for his place of birth, and it was in the 8th house of the eclipse chart for that area, which is interesting. The south node, because it was a south node eclipse, was conjunct Mercury, and Mercury rules his ascendant, which is his health and vitality and everything to do with him, and also ruled his MC and the 10th house, so career and public reputation. So that was really interesting. It was very unfortunate for him. And then we had in the eclipse chart Uranus conjunct the MC.
And the south node is right there, taking something away again.
We've got Mars conjunct Pluto in his 8th house.
Yeah.
So that was the solar eclipse. There was a solar eclipse afterwards because he lingered until November or something, didn't he? When did he die? September.
Yeah.
So he died in September. This is a chart for when he died. We don't know what time he died, but we know that he died on the 19th of September. I've set it for his place of birth again. But yeah, Uranus on the Saturn.
Right on Saturn. The moon on the north node.
Yeah.
In the 12th house, which is never a good house to be in for the moon.
And then Mars on his MC, and you know, Mars is violent. Yeah.
Yep.
The solar eclipse afterwards, this was November. You were talking about how solar eclipses can, well, any eclipse, I suppose, can kind of generate something beforehand. He died in September. He was shot in, when did we say he was shot? He was shot in July.
July 2nd.
It's shot on July 2nd. There was the solar eclipse in May. He died in September, and then the solar eclipse in November. Just interesting. It was at 29 degrees conjunct his natal Mercury. So Mercury brought in again. I wonder if that time, I should look it up, if maybe something was happening, maybe there was, it would be too late for a funeral, I imagine, by that stage, but maybe there was some sort of commemoration or something at that time. But yeah, just interesting because that Mercury rules his 10th house and the first house.
Yeah. The house that expresses who you are.
And that was in 1881. So this is the Aries Ingress chart for that year, for the year that, was it Garfield or McKinley? I always mix
It's
them up.
Garfield.
Garfield died.
Yeah.
So
right.
Late degree on that ascendant there. So, interesting. Change of president.
for an Aries Ingress, yeah. That's, you look at it every spring, you know, right around when the sun enters Aries is how this chart is formulated. And at that point, the ascendant is right at a very late degree. So is the moon. Well, it's not that late, but it's, you know, it's late enough.
Oh, actually, it's interesting because it's that, actually, it's opposite Algol. Algol's at 26 Taurus. I was thinking that one was. But there is another chart that had Algol.
Yeah, it's McKinley. I think that was the next one.
Yeah. Interesting. MC as well is very close to changing signs. So there's your leader. The 10th house ruler is Jupiter because it's Sagittarius on the 10th. And here's Jupiter in the 2nd with Saturn. They're three degrees away, but yeah, still very close.
Yeah.
And Saturn's the greater malefic, and that Mercury opposed by Uranus. And
So
then
whose chart are we going to be looking at now?
McKinley.
McKinley?
So,
I think I did a 5th grade report on him.
oh, okay.
That's how I knew there was presidents that were assassinated. Yeah, so this eclipse is happening in the 8th house.
Never a good sign.
Yeah,
and I mean, if you're having an eclipse in your 8th house, don't panic.
No, yeah, no.
It doesn't mean you're going to die. I mean, this is somebody very, very high position, you know, and yeah,
it's gonna be notable. And yeah, just because there are certain signatures that you can see, and if it's not activated, it doesn't really matter. It matters. It just doesn't matter. Maybe now it might matter 10 years from now, 20 years from now. I'm gonna die, Lynda. You're gonna die. It's somewhere written in our natal chart somewhere. It's just when that gets activated is when this becomes a concern. So just if you see something in your 8th house, don't.
It's more likely to be something coming to light to do with shared resources or financial agreements or an inheritance or, you know, something along that nature.
Just looking at this, I mean, when he was born with a new moon.
Yes.
Okay, so what are the chances you're born with a new moon, and then that new moon is now in the 8th house? You know, so actually, that's all the timing kind of things.
Actually, no, that's actually a balsamic moon.
Yeah, but it's what I'm saying is it's close enough to where.
Yeah. Just I get you. I get you.
That's what I meant by those two luminaries. I mean, so for the chances of almost a new moon and almost a new moon, it's, and then for it to be in your 8th house. I mean, new moons happen all the time. They don't happen in your 8th house all the time. That was my point.
Yeah. What I liked about this, like I said before, I've been setting these for their birthplaces. And with the eclipses, the part of fortune is always on the ascendant or the descendant at eclipses. And except for the eclipse for his place of birth, the ascendant and the part of fortune, which is what befalls us, you know, things that, how did you describe that earlier?
Beyond our control. Things we don't
control. Yeah. So the ascendant and part of fortune is on his sun. A lot of stuff going on in the 9th house.
Yeah.
Got the north node quite close. I mean, it's 4 degrees, but it's
on Mars.
Yeah.
Or close to Mars. Yeah.
Close to Mars. Yeah. Oh. And then we've got Uranus and Pluto opposition. Wow. I mean, that was happening for everyone, but yeah.
Right.
So it was 1901. If we have a look at the Aries Ingress for 1901, we've got that new moon signature again, which is rather interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, it just totally amazes me. Even though it's a strong 1st house with the Saturn in Capricorn, it doesn't. Saturn in your 1st house could be not a pleasant place to have it.
Yeah.
Because it rules the 1st house and it's ruling the 2nd house in this chart. Not a whole lot. Not a whole lot that it signifies, but. Yeah, it's still not good, no matter, you know, what. Well, you have in the 8th house, you have Mars, which is separation.
Yes.
And I believe that Mars is directly squaring the nodes, which is also not a good signature. Yeah,
it's usually associated with crisis. So
in the 8th house.
Very interesting.
So that's how that eclipse in Ingress showed up in that chart. And then for the next chart is Roosevelt.
I love this one. You know, he gets shot in the chest. He's actually protected because he's got a speech rolled up in there in a spectacle case, and he keeps talking. He finishes his speech. You know, he's a character. Yeah, the eclipse chart set for, this is the 10th of October. When was he shot? The potential, it was 4 days later that he was shot, on the 14th. So this was just beforehand. The eclipse is happening in the 5th house of his natal chart, but the 12th house of the eclipse chart set for his place of birth. It's the South Node eclipse. Yeah.
I'm looking at the South Node, and then I'm looking at Mars in that 5th house, because wasn't he speaking at like an arena of some kind, which is notorious for the 5th house? But the Mercury, your speech is between the South Node and Mars. It's like, oh
yeah. I don't like what you're saying. I'm going to shoot you. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Probably could have used an astrologer for deciding when to give that speech. I don't know. There has to have been something good there. The Jupiter or Venus has to be aspecting it well, because he survived that.
He did. Yeah.
Yeah.
He does have the Jupiter close to his natal Venus. Where's Venus? Venus is close to the ascendant and that part of fortune. And Venus is in Scorpio though, so she's not especially strong.
No, we got Jupiter is trining the. It's a retrograde Jupiter, but still it's trining Mercury.
Oh wow, look at this. I didn't notice this before. 16 degrees Libra, it's squaring his natal moon.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, you can look at a chart for hours and see new things pop up out of it.
And then he had Saturn on
right
that
on Uranus.
Yeah. So we didn't look at the Aries Ingress for that, because I mean he didn't die or anything. And then we have Ronald Reagan, which was quite a dramatic chart as well. The eclipse before he was shot. So he was shot on the 30th of March 1981, but there was an eclipse on the 4th of Feb 1981. And it's at 16 degrees of Aquarius, which just happened to be on his natal sun. So yeah, it's a South Node eclipse again.
Right.
South Node eclipses are kind of, I think, considered a little bit more malefic than North Node eclipses.
Yeah.
So yeah.
The South Node looks like like a horseshoe with the with like 2 round circles on the top of it. So that's what we're referring to as the South and North Node. Is they're the symbols that look like headphones or a horseshoe. So headphones would be the north one with the 2 ears, and then it's up in Leo right now on the outer wheel, and then the South Node looks like a horseshoe. So that's what we're talking about. But yeah, it's amazing that the South Node is there with the eclipse there. It's again, you're taking away something, and
it wasn't a total eclipse, it was an annular eclipse. So yeah, but that's just remarkable. I couldn't believe it when we saw that was right on his sun.
Yeah.
And then you've got Mercury on the on his Venus.
Yeah. In the 4th house.
He had Chiron on his moon, so it probably knocked him around, probably more than they like to admit, but yeah, he came through that.
Right. All right. So do we have Kennedy's chart?
Oh, I forgot about Kennedy. How could I totally forget about Kennedy? Okay.
He had a very interesting chart.
Yeah.
So the inner one is the natal chart, and the outer one is the eclipse chart, just so that we're aware. And what we're looking at is where the north and south nodes are at, because that's going to tell you pretty quickly where the eclipses are happening. And then make sure that you see the sun and the moon right there, and that's the solar eclipse, because the solar eclipse only happens at a new moon.
Yeah. So we've got the eclipse degree at 27 degrees Cancer, 24 minutes, which is right on his Saturn in the 10th house. And it's also close within 4 degrees of his MC, which is career and public reputation.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was, and setting it for his place of birth, Mars at 26 degrees Virgo, conjunct the MC of the eclipse chart.
And this eclipse, if you look in the Cancer square there, this eclipse is actually happening in his 8th house.
It's in his 10th house, but it's in the 8th house of the eclipse chart.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. The descendant of the eclipse chart is conjunct his sun, which is interesting because the ascendant's that's where the sun's coming up over the horizon at the time, date and place of your birth. The MC is kind of the highest point of the chart. And the descendant is kind of when the sun sinks below the earth. So in ancient times, they kind of did consider the 7th house was kind of like, you know, you're dying, the sun is sinking, it's going below earth. So it's interesting that that descendant of the eclipse chart is conjunct his sun. And yeah. And then we have Jupiter on his natal descendant.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
And yeah, Saturn pretty close to that Uranus.
Yeah, seems to be when Saturn and Uranus get together. That this is not the first chart we've looked at today where Saturn and Uranus were together and seem to have been impactful.
Yeah, the Aries Ingress for 1963. The Sun in the 4th house. Sun can be the ruler, and the 4th house. Although traditionally the 8th house is like the house of death and taxes. But other people's money. 12th house can also be associated with death, but so can the 4th, and as we were saying, the 7th, because the sun is sinking below earth. But the 4th house is kind of like the most private, but also like the lowest part of the chart. So yeah, interesting that it's there. The ruler of the 10th house, which in this case is Venus, because it's
10th house being the house of the creator.
Yeah, it is. Venus here is conjunct Saturn. Though if we use the MC, it would be Mars, because the MC is actually in the 11th whole sign house, and it's over here in the 8th. So, and Uranus and Pluto, they're 8 degrees away at that time, but still quite significant. So yeah.
Makes for very interesting astrology for sure.
Yeah.
I think the trick is getting out ahead of it, so that you can, plan when to, be more protected during a speech.
Yeah, I also wonder too if it isn't more significant. There's a thing called annual perfections, and we'll have to do a podcast on that. But every year you move into a different year. Like I've just moved into an 8th house year. Last year, from my birthday onwards, I was in a 7th house year. But my 8th house is ruled by the sun. So this year and last year, because last year my 7th house year was ruled by the moon. So if you got the moon or the sun as the lord of your year, eclipses tend to be more significant, and that's something that we didn't look at for these charts, but something you can definitely look at.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you've got an eclipse, particularly the eclipse degree, making contact with a natal planet or point, it's probably likely to be more significant. And it's possibly, if you can go back 18 years or maybe even 36 years, there might be some sort of linking, not exactly the same thing, but maybe something to do with, somebody you knew at that time or some event. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh, I was going to ask you too, Donna. I know a lot of people put out crystals and that to be, it's not really a new moon thing, it's a full moon thing. But I know that people talk about not necessarily putting out crystals to be charged under an eclipse.
No. No. Okay. For healing, I don't put out crystals out for the moon or the eclipses or the full moons or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I do use the sun, but
Mm-hmm.
that's for that particular stone I'm working with, the sun for that morning of that day, planetary hours is what's used. And that is the same concept that you would use for if you were making talismans as well. You would elect a time to get the most bang for your buck from that planet. And that's how that's when you would put out your stones for charging, is if you are looking for a specific planetary energy to go to them. Otherwise, no. And that is for talismans. That's for when you have a definitive purpose. For healing, I don't tend to put them out.
I'd heard that people that often don't do it during an eclipse because it's just too erratic an energy. Yeah.
Well, you wouldn't want to put stones out for a talisman. I would think not during an eclipse, unless you're trying to do a talisman that might take away something from somebody. No, I don't know. That would be the only application I would use an eclipse for. Otherwise, they are they're symbolized by the malefic. So the north one is represents Saturn a lot, and the south one represents Mars. So I'm not so sure I would want to.
Yeah, no, I totally get you.
Yeah, but the crystals have their own. They have a what I call a DOR, which is a dominant oscillatory rate, which is not what I call it. It's what I was trained by Hibiscus Moon when I went through her course. It's a dominant oscillatory rate. So if you leave a stone and it's beating like this, and all of a sudden it gets dropped or something, and it goes like really, really fast. If you just leave it alone, it will go back to where it's supposed to go. I mean, these stones have been around for thousands of years. Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
One impactful event is not going to crush a stone, but you do need to give it a vacation, or some alone time or earth time. We bury your stones to get them back to their dominant oscillatory rate, which is the I'm sure my teacher didn't coin it, but that's how she describes it, as it's a very strong rate that each individual stone will have.
Sounds like a little heartbeat for them or something.
They kind of are. That's a really good analogy there. Yeah.
So if they've had a big shock, they've been dropped, their heart's racing, you just let them calm down.
Let them calm down. Yeah.
Oh, sweet. Nice.
Yeah.
And where can people contact you, Donna?
You can get a hold of me at donnabastrology.com, and where I do a blog post every week to let you know what the planetary energies are going to be. And you can email me at donnabarconsulting@gmail.com. And where can they get a hold of you?
They can get hold of me at my website, Scallywag Astrology, which is astrology.scallywag.com. I'm on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter. I'm doing astrology readings, synastry, which is relationships, year ahead forecast, or just to have a look at your natal chart. And what services are you offering, Donna?
I offer natal readings, electional. I offer horary as well.
Yeah, we need to do a podcast on that too. Yeah.
As well as the healing. Yeah.
Yeah. You got a lot on your plate.
I do have a lot of fun with it. I you know what, if you get rewarded, and when I see improvement, if I can see like somebody getting a benefit out of it, it amps me up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
that's all I need.
that's brilliant. Okie dokie. Well, thank you for listening. Please like, subscribe, share, rate, whatever you want to do, depending where you're watching or listening to this. Yeah, and good luck with the eclipses.
And please share, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.